The rain fell in relentless sheets over the city, drowning the streets in a cold, lifeless gray. Neon lights flickered against the slick pavement, their colors muted under the oppressive gloom. On every corner, the unmistakable presence of galactic enforcers cast long, menacing shadows. Their tall, angular forms moved with machine-like precision, their glowing blue eyes scanning for the faintest hint of defiance. Humanity's spirit had been broken, or so the aliens believed. In the heart of this battered city stood the Tribunal Tower, a grotesque monolith of alien architecture piercing the storm-laden sky. Inside, Emily Whitaker, a frail girl no older than 10, stood trembling before a panel of alien judges. Her wide, tear-filled eyes darted from one judge to the next, her small hands clutching the hem of her tattered dress. She didn't understand the charges against her, but the venom in the aliens' voices left no doubt about her fate. "This human," boomed one of the judges, his voice resonating like the grinding of stone, "is guilty of inciting chaos and undermining the galactic order." The chamber was silent except for the distant rumble of thunder. No defense was allowed, no plea for mercy considered. The execution order was signed with an emotionless flourish, and Emily was dragged away by 2 towering guards. Her cries echoed down the metallic halls, piercing the hearts of the few humans forced to witness the event on the tribunal's broadcast. Far from the tower, in a dilapidated bar on the city's outskirts, Jonathan Blake sat nursing a glass of whiskey. The old Marine's rugged face was etched with scars, each one telling a story he'd rather forget. His military jacket hung loosely over his broad shoulders, a remnant of a time when humanity still fought its battles on its own terms. The bar's ancient jukebox sputtered out a weak rendition of an old country tune, the melody a faint reminder of a world that no longer existed. Jonathan's comm device buzzed on the counter. He ignored it at first, focusing instead on the amber liquid swirling in his glass. When the buzzing persisted, he let out a low growl and snatched the device. "This better be good," he muttered. The voice on the other end was grim. "They executed her, John. Emily's gone." Jonathan froze. The whiskey glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, the sound cutting through the bar's stale air. His mind raced, memories of Emily flooding in. Her laughter, her boundless curiosity, her resilience despite the bleakness around her. She had been a beacon of light in a world consumed by darkness. Who gave the order? Jonathan's voice was low, dangerous, direct from the tribunal. "They broadcast it everywhere." The voice replied, "John, there's something else. We've had a visitor. He left a message for you." The comm device beeped, signaling an incoming file. Jonathan opened it, his blood running cold at the sight of the words scrawled in crimson. The debt must be paid. The nightmares awaken. He didn't need to ask who had sent it. Only one being would use such words. A figure of legend, whispered about in hushed tones. For centuries, he had been a phantom, a myth. But Jonathan knew better. Dracula was real, and he was coming. In the dim recesses of a forgotten cathedral, deep beneath the city, a shadow stirred. Red eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, watching the rain cascade through the cracked stained-glass windows. Dracula had remained hidden for years, content to let the world burn without his interference. But Emily's death had awakened something ancient and unforgiving within him. "She was innocent," he murmured, his voice a velvety growl that reverberated through the hollow chamber. "And they took her from me." The rain outside intensified, as if the storm itself raged in sympathy with his wrath. Slowly, Dracula stepped into the faint light, filtering through the cathedral. His face was pale, ageless, his features sharp and regal. He wore a long, black coat that seemed to absorb the light, its hem brushing against the dusty floor. The sound of footsteps echoed through the cathedral, breaking his reverie. A man emerged from the shadows, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife. His face was stern, his eyes filled with defiance. "You knew this would happen," the man said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Dracula turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "And you think I should have stopped it? You could have done something," the man snapped. "You swore to protect her." "I swore to protect her from mortals, Jonathan," Dracula replied coolly. "Not from the arrogance of alien gods." Jonathan took a step closer, his anger barely contained. "Well, now she's gone, and those alien gods are about to find out what a real nightmare looks like." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Dracula's lips. Bold words for a mortal. Jonathan held his ground. "I don't care what you are, Dracula. If you're in, then we do this together. If not, I'll bring them down myself." The vampire studied him for a long moment, his crimson eyes narrowing. "You've grown since the last time we met. Perhaps you're finally worth my time." Jonathan let out a dry laugh. "I'll take that as a yes." Dracula's gaze shifted to the storm raging outside. "The tribunal believes they've silenced her, but they have only lit the fire that will burn their empire to ash." The two men stood in silence, their shared grief and fury binding them together. Above them, the storm howled, its fury mirroring their own. And as the first crack of lightning split the sky, they began to plan their vengeance. Night had settled over the city, but sleep was a luxury no one could afford. The streets hummed with uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional distant roar of alien patrol crafts slicing through the sky. Fear hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of burnt metal from countless clashes between humanity and their conquerors. Yet in a forgotten corner of the city, beneath the decaying ruins of an old subway station, a new kind of war was about to begin. Jonathan Blake paced a makeshift command room, his boots scuffing against the cracked concrete floor. Maps, holographic displays, and tactical notes were strewn across metal tables salvaged from scrap yards. The few men around him, grizzled veterans and desperate rebels alike, watched in tense silence. They had seen defeat too many times to count, but tonight something was different. Hope, faint as it was, flickered in their eyes. Dracula stood apart from the group, his presence commanding without effort. He leaned casually against a stone pillar, arms crossed over his chest, his long coat pooling around his boots. Despite the chaos swirling around him, he radiated an unsettling calm, as though centuries of existence had dulled his capacity for surprise. Jonathan stopped pacing and faced the men. "We all know why we're here," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "The tribunal executed Emily. They wanted to make an example of her, but all they did was light the fuse on a powder keg." A low murmur rippled through the room. Some clenched their fists, others nodded grimly. Emily had been more than just a child. She had been a symbol of defiance, a spark of innocence in a world gone dark. Jonathan's gaze hardened. "We're done being hunted. Tonight, we strike back." One of the men, a burly soldier named Carter with a thick southern drawl, spoke up. "You got a plan, Blake, or are we just throwing rocks at giants again?" Jonathan allowed himself a faint smile. "We've got more than rocks this time, Carter." He gestured toward Dracula, who straightened and stepped forward, his movements fluid and predatory. The men stiffened instinctively, their survival instincts kicking in at the sight of him. "You've heard stories," Jonathan said, his tone measured. "Whispers about a monster who walks among men. Well, he's real, and he's on our side." Dracula's crimson eyes gleamed faintly in the dim light. "I prefer the term legend, but I'll accept monster for tonight." Carter let out a nervous laugh. "Well, ain't that just peachy? We got ourselves a vampire." Jonathan's voice cut through the tension. "He's not just a vampire. He's our ace in the hole. And trust me, we're going to need every advantage we can get." Dracula's lips curled into a faint smile. "Your faith is refreshing, Jonathan. Misguided, perhaps, but refreshing." Ignoring the jab, Jonathan continued. "The tribunal thinks they're untouchable. They hide behind their technology, their enforcers, their fear tactics. But they bleed, just like anyone else. And we're going to make him bleed," Carter growled. Jonathan nodded. "Exactly. But we do this smart. Surgical strikes, coordinated attacks, hit their supply lines, disrupt their communications, and most importantly, send a message. Humanity isn't done fighting. The men around the table straightened, their resolve hardening. Years of oppression had worn them down. But tonight, they were soldiers again. Dracula's voice cut through the charged silence. You speak of war, Jonathan, but wars are not won on brute force alone. Strategy, deception, and fear. These are the tools of victory. Jonathan met his gaze. Then it's a good thing you're here. I've got the muscle. You bring the fear. Dracula's smile was razor sharp. A partnership forged in blood and vengeance. How? Poetic. Carter cleared his throat. Hate to break up this little love fest, but what's the first target? Jonathan pointed to a holographic map. Tribunal energy node at Sector 14. It's heavily guarded. But if we take it out, we'll cripple their power grid for the entire city. One of the younger rebels, a wiry man named Harris, frowned. Won't they just reroute power from their orbital stations? Eventually, Jonathan admitted, but it'll take time. Time we can use to hit more targets. Dracula's gaze remained fixed on the map. The node is underground, shielded by layers of reinforced alloy. Traditional explosives won't be sufficient. Jonathan's expression darkened. That's where you come in. A flicker of something dangerous crossed Dracula's face. Very well. But understand this, Jonathan. Once I enter their domain, there will be no mercy. Jonathan's voice was steel. Good. Because they don't deserve any. The room fell into a tense silence, each man grappling with the enormity of what lay ahead. But there was no turning back now. They had crossed a line, and the only way forward was through fire and blood. As the group dispersed to prepare for the mission, Jonathan lingered by the map, his mind racing with contingencies and risks. Dracula moved to stand beside him, his presence a cold shadow. You've changed, Dracula remarked. Jonathan snorted. War does that to people. Not just war, Dracula said softly. Loss. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Emily didn't deserve what happened to her. And I'm not letting it go unanswered. Dracula's voice was almost gentle. Vengeance is a powerful motivator. But be careful, Jonathan. It can consume you. Jonathan met his gaze, unflinching. Better to be consumed by vengeance than paralyzed by fear. Dracula inclined his head, spoken like a man who has already walked through hell. Jonathan's lips curled into a grim smile. Then let's take a stroll back, shall we? As they turned to leave, the storm outside intensified, lightning splitting the sky with blinding fury. The city trembled beneath the weight of what was to come, unaware that two of the most dangerous beings on Earth were about to unleash chaos. And the tribunal had no idea what was coming for them. The night sky glowed with flickering lights as fires raged across the tribunal stronghold. Smoke curled upward, thick and choking, carrying the scent of scorched metal and desperation. The once impenetrable fortress was now a battleground, its sleek alien architecture shattered by explosions and the relentless fury of human rebellion. Rebel forces moved through the ruins like shadows, their weapons barking defiance against alien enforcers scrambling to regroup. Jonathan Blake crouched behind a twisted column, sweat streaking down his soot-covered face. His rifle was warm in his hands, the barrel smoking from recent use. He scanned the chaos unfolding before him, heart pounding with a mixture of exhilaration and grim determination. The rebels had pushed further into the stronghold than anyone had dared to hope, but the fight was far from over. Status? Jonathan barked into his calm. Carter's voice crackled through the earpiece. Sector B cleared. We got some scorch marks, but the boys are still kicking. Good. Hold your position and cover the perimeter. We can't let them box us in. You got it, boss, Carter drawled, his voice steady despite the chaos. Jonathan's gaze flicked to Dracula, who stood a few paces away, surveying the battlefield with an unsettling calm. His coat billowed around him, untouched by the grime that clung to everyone else. Crimson eyes gleamed in the flickering light, and a faint smile curled his lips as if he found amusement in the carnage. Jonathan wiped sweat from his brow. "Enjoying yourself?" Dracula's smile widened. "War has always held a certain artistry, don't you think?" Jonathan shook his head. "You're twisted, you know that?" "Perhaps. But tonight, that works in your favor." Before Jonathan could respond, a high-pitched whine cut through the air, a sound that made his blood run cold. He whipped around just in time to see a squad of alien enforcers advancing, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. "Incoming!" Jonathan shouted, raising his rifle. Dracula moved faster than thought, a blur of shadow and crimson eyes. He tore into the enforcers with savage precision, claws rending through armor and flesh alike. The aliens had no time to react before they were reduced to lifeless heaps on the ground. Jonathan exhaled sharply. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Dracula straightened, licking a speck of alien blood from his fingertip. "Wise decision." The calm crackled again. "Blake, we got a problem." Carter's voice was grim. "They're bringing in reinforcements. Big ones." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "How big?" "Think walking tanks with bad attitudes." Jonathan swore under his breath. "Hold your ground. We'll handle it." Dracula's eyes gleamed with amusement. "A challenge, then. How delightful." Jonathan ignored him, his mind racing. They needed to disable the Stronghold's command center before the reinforcements could overwhelm them. But getting there would be a nightmare. "Come on," Jonathan said, motioning to Dracula. "We need to move." They weaved through the chaos, ducking under falling debris and exchanging fire with alien soldiers. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone from energy weapons. Explosions rocked the ground, sending shockwaves through the fortress. As they neared the command center, a massive door loomed before them, reinforced with layers of alien alloy. Jonathan's heart sank. Blasting through it would take time they didn't have. Dracula stepped forward, his expression almost bored. "Allow me." Before Jonathan could protest, Dracula placed his hand against the door. The temperature in the air plummeted as frost spread from his fingertips, creeping across the metal surface. With a deafening crack, the door shattered into fragments, revealing the command center beyond. Jonathan blinked. "Remind me to hire you as my locksmith." Dracula's lips curled into a smirk. "A versatile skill set is essential for survival." They stepped into the command center, which was eerily pristine compared to the chaos outside. Holographic displays flickered with streams of alien data, and the air hummed with energy. At the center of the room stood a tall, imposing alien figure clad in ornate armor. Its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence. "So," the alien hissed, its voice a blend of contempt and curiosity, "the rebels bring a monster to their cause. How quaint." Jonathan raised his rifle. "Quaint enough to tear your empire down." The alien sneered. "You are ants beneath our feet." Dracula's voice was cold as death. "Ants have a way of surviving when empires crumble." The alien lunged, faster than Jonathan expected for its size. He barely had time to dive aside as it struck, its claws carving deep grooves into the floor. Jonathan rolled to his feet, firing in controlled bursts. The round sparked off the alien's armor, but did little damage. Dracula moved with predatory grace, engaging the alien in a blur of motion. Claws clashed against armor, and the room echoed with the sound of their ferocious battle. Jonathan circled, looking for an opening. "Any suggestions?" Jonathan shouted. "Keep it distracted," Dracula growled. Jonathan gritted his teeth. "Sure, no problem." He fired another volley, aiming for the alien's exposed joints. The creature roared in pain, momentarily staggering. Dracula seized the opportunity, sinking his claws into its side and tearing through flesh and bone. The alien let out a guttural scream, its body convulsing before collapsing to the floor. Blood pooled around it, dark and viscous. Jonathan lowered his rifle, breathing hard. That's one way to handle it. Dracula straightened, his coat immaculate despite the carnage. Efficiency is key. Jonathan shook his head. You're something else, you know that. I've been told, Dracula said dryly. The calm crackled to life. Blake, reinforcements are falling back. We did it. Carter's voice was triumphant. Jonathan allowed himself a rare smile. Copy that. Secure the perimeter and regroup. As the chaos outside subsided, Jonathan looked around the command center. They had struck a blow against the tribunal. But the war was far from over. Dracula's gaze met his. Tonight was a victory, but you know this is only the beginning. Jonathan nodded. Yeah, but it's a damn good start. Dracula's lips curled into a faint smile. Indeed, the weight of what they had accomplished settled over Jonathan, mingling with the resolve to see it through to the end. They had faced monsters and emerged victorious, but the true battle was yet to come. And Jonathan knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't face it alone. The night was unnaturally still, the silence pressing down like a heavy shroud. Smoke lingered in the cold air, curling upward from the ruins of the tribunal stronghold. The rebels stood victorious, weary but unbroken, their eyes reflecting a hard-earned triumph. Jonathan Blake surveyed the scene, his rifle resting against his shoulder. Victory tasted bitter when it came at such a cost. Carter approached, his face streaked with grime but lit by a triumphant grin. We did it, boss. Drove those alien freaks right out. Jonathan nodded, though his expression remained grim. This isn't over. We took out their command post, but the tribunal won't let this slide. They'll come back stronger. Then we'll hit them harder, Carter said fiercely. Jonathan's lips twitched into a faint smile. That's the spirit. A sudden movement caught his attention. Dracula emerged from the shadows, his crimson eyes gleaming in the flickering firelight. His coat billowed behind him, untouched by the grime of battle. He looked as regal and predatory as ever, a stark contrast to the battered rebels. Your people fight well, Dracula said, his voice smooth as silk. They fight because they have to, Jonathan replied. Dracula's gaze swept across the ruined battlefield. Necessity breeds strength. Perhaps that's why humans are so persistent. Jonathan snorted. Is that your version of a compliment? Take it as you will, Dracula said with a faint smile. Before Jonathan could respond, a sharp whistle cut through the air. He turned to see a scout sprinting toward them, his face pale with urgency. Commander Blake, the scout gasped. You need to see this. Jonathan's stomach tightened. What is it? Just come, sir. You won't believe it. Jonathan exchanged a glance with Dracula, who arched an elegant brow. Without a word, they followed the scout through the ruins. They reached the edge of a clearing where a group of rebels had gathered, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and fear. In the center of the clearing, an enormous alien ship loomed, its sleek surface gleaming under the pale moonlight. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. The ship was unlike any he had seen before, bristling with weaponry and pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Carter whistled low. That's one big, ugly bird. Dracula's eyes narrowed. A warship, advanced beyond anything the tribunal has deployed thus far. Jonathan's jaw clenched. They didn't waste any time, did they? The ship's hull shimmered, and a section of it began to open, revealing a ramp that extended to the ground. The rebels tensed, weapons raised. Hold your fire, Jonathan ordered. A figure emerged from the ship, tall and imposing, clad in ornate armor that gleamed with an unnatural light. Its eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent intelligence. Jonathan's grip tightened on his rifle. Who are you? The alien's voice was deep and resonant. I am Exarch Vorith, Supreme Commander of the Tribunal Fleet. You have defied us for the last time. Dracula's lips curled into a predatory smile. Ah, a worthy opponent at last. Vortha's gaze flicked to Dracula. And you, I have heard tales of your kind, ancient predators clinging to relevance in a changing universe. Dracula's smile widened, revealing sharp fangs. "Let me assure you, Exarch, I am very relevant." Jonathan stepped forward, his voice hard. "You want to fight, Vorith? You've got one." Vorith's expression was contemptuous. "You are but insects beneath our feet." "Funny," Jonathan said. "That's what the last guy said before we wiped the floor with him." Vorith's eyes flared with anger. "You will be annihilated." Dracula's voice was cold as death. "We'll see about that." The tension was palpable, the air crackling with impending violence. Jonathan's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. They had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. This would be no different. "Prepare yourselves," Jonathan said, his voice steady. "This is going to get ugly." The rebels braced for the coming storm, their weapons raised and their resolve unshakable. Vorith's forces began to pour from the ship, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Dracula moved with supernatural speed, tearing through the alien ranks with savage precision. Jonathan and the rebels fought with fierce determination, their bullets finding their marks even against the aliens' advanced armor. Explosions rocked the clearing, fire and smoke engulfing the battlefield. Jonathan's ears rang, but he kept moving, his focus unrelenting. He caught sight of Vorith in the chaos, the alien commander cutting through rebels with ruthless efficiency. Jonathan gritted his teeth. "I've had enough of you," he muttered. He charged toward Vorith, dodging enemy fire and leaping over debris. Vorith turned to meet him, their eyes locking in a moment of deadly intent. "You are a fool to challenge me," Vorith snarled. "Yeah, I get that a lot," Jonathan shot back. They clashed, Jonathan's rifle blazing as Vorith's energy blade hummed through the air. Sparks flew as their weapons met, each strike reverberating through the chaos. Dracula appeared at Jonathan's side, his movements a blur of lethal grace. Together, they drove Vorith back, their combined fury overwhelming even the alien commander's formidable strength. Vorith roared in defiance, but his defiance was short-lived. Dracula's claws found their mark, tearing through armor and flesh. Vorith staggered, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. Jonathan raised his rifle, aiming for the alien's head. "This is for Earth," he said coldly. The shot rang out, and Vorith crumpled to the ground lifeless. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of flames and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Jonathan lowered his rifle, his chest heaving. "It's over," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Dracula straightened, his coat immaculate despite the carnage. "For now," he said quietly. Jonathan nodded, knowing Dracula was right. The tribunal would come again, but they would be ready. As the rebels began to regroup, Jonathan looked at Dracula. "We made a pretty good team." Dracula's lips curled into a faint smile. "Indeed. Perhaps there is hope for humanity after all." Jonathan chuckled, despite the weight of the moment. "Coming from you, that's almost a compliment." Dracula's eyes gleamed. "Take it as you will." The night sky was still heavy with smoke, but a sliver of hope pierced through the darkness. They had won this battle, and as long as they stood together, they would face whatever came next. Jonathan Blake knew one thing for certain. Earth would never bow, and with allies like Dracula by his side, they just might have a fighting chance.